Nick, as a nation, the question I think a lot of people have, I don't know, Carol was asking this question earlier, are we less secure or are we more secure the longer this war between the U.S. and Iran goes on?
Are we less secure? I think the big question that you have to look at this from a few angles. One is obviously U.S. bases in the region and U.S. allies, so their willingness to sort of partner with the United States in the long term. Big question there. They are obviously getting a lot more anxious given that Iran's way of responding has been to attack U.S. allies as well as U.S. bases. So service members in the region certainly less secure. I would say that hasn't really bled over into the United States itself, though obviously there are assassination plots against the president where they've accused Iran of trying to do that. So that is a big concern. Economically, I think on this very much an open question and a much more difficult one. Oil going back up. The president had said when he had signed that ceasefire, listen, we wanted to avoid economic catastrophe. Well, here we are again. They're looking to potentially ramp up strikes again, and you can bet that will have real aftershocks for the economy, and it will hit people's pocketbooks back home.
Well, speaking of such, the U.S. forces began conducting a new wave of strikes on Iran, so it continues, and it goes on and on. One of the things that we have been talking about as a team, Nick, is military stockpiles. Where are we? You've got the Ukraine war with Russia, whatever assist the U.S. has been providing there, obviously its efforts, its actions with the war with Iran. Where are we? Just yesterday, President Trump was talking about, calling military contractors to speed up production. A lot of them were at this event in Pennsylvania with him.
Right. Well, there are so many issues there, but certainly the information we have here, the administration is not disclosing the extent of its stockpiles for some of its more advanced weapon systems, but certainly when you fire a lot of cruise missiles and bombs at Iran, that means you can't use those weapons or stockpile those weapons if conflict should arise elsewhere. We've seen that strain, especially on the ballistic missiles, on Patriot missiles and things like that, which cost millions of dollars and take years to produce. And then we've also seen on the flip side, the U.S. has really struggled to ramp up production of certain other munitions, such as 155 millimeter shells for artillery that were so desperately needed in Ukraine. Obviously, that's not as much of an issue for President Trump because he's not supplying those weapons as much as Joe Biden was, but you do see this issue across the defense sector, which is why it's so important to the president. Defense companies are not able to ramp up as quickly as he wants, and that's also pushed a real question for other countries that want to buy those things from the United States. The wait list there sometimes goes for years.
Nick, we covered this late yesterday, and I want to get your take on this. The Wall Street Journal out with reporting yesterday that said that the president is leaning toward expanding U.S. military operations in Iran, hosting a Situation Room meeting on Tuesday to discuss the seizure of Karg Island, questions about the actual presence of troops in the area as well. What's your reporting telling you about the way that this could escalate?
Well, certainly the big question, what you saw from the overnight strikes was itself an escalation. If they're hitting an oil tanker, that does suggest that the administration is willing to get a little closer to that line of really going after civilian and energy infrastructure rather than just military infrastructure. That's something the president has not really been willing to do in an extensive way. And if they start doing that, that could open up a lot of thorny legal questions. But then obviously there's the bigger risk. If he decides to commit troops to the ground, that extends the time horizon much more for the conflict. Obviously, it puts U.S. troops in much greater danger. The blowback could be much more severe. There's a reason why presidents have wanted to rely on air power for so long, because though it's expensive, it's considered a much less dangerous way to do the conflict. Of course, as Iran is showing, they've been able to hold out against that. So the president really wants this thing to end, but he doesn't seem to be able to achieve his strategic ends through bombing alone. So that then raises that question of a more serious commitment, either going after infrastructure or providing troops. But, a huge political issue for the president, as well as, the livelihood, lives of his troops, because this is something he campaigned against, no new wars. And this one's been going on for several months, and indications suggest he may be thinking of deepening the U.S. involvement just before the midterms. That's going to have blowback.
Nick, Iran's lead negotiator, I'm curious the intel that you guys feel like you're getting. Iran's lead negotiator defending diplomatic efforts to end the war, pushing back against hardliners, urging him to abandon a tentative peace deal and avenge the country's slain supreme leader. What do we know? We keep thinking about what's going on inside Iran. What do we know about the internal tensions and battles within Iran and how that complicates bringing this war to an end?
Right. I mean, so those remarks that you cite clearly show that there are deep factional divisions within Iran, just like there are, anywhere else, including in the United States, where you have members of Congress or members of the administration within the administration, members of the opposition, all of which have a voice and can slow down or speed up that process. And we have seen Iran, you have the political leadership, you have the IRGC, you have the supreme leader, all of whom have deep interests in the outcome of this thing. But what we do see is sort of a fascinating element, which is despite this war, there are two very powerful and clear factions in the U.S. and in Iran that do want to see this thing end and are looking for an off-ramp. The question, of course, is whether they have the power to, push that policy through amid all the voices that don't want that. And then, obviously, the issue of how the U.S. and Iran either read or misread each other's intentions or actions. So it's a whole sort of swelter of competing interests and power centers on both sides, not even looking at the dynamic when the U.S. and Iran actually get in the room with each other.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the politics of this too. I want to home in specifically on the nuclear issue and the many months that it took over a decade ago for the JCPOA to be negotiated. What is the U.S. strategy around the nuclear enrichment program in Iran right now? Because it seems like sometimes we hear about from the president about actually physically going and getting what he calls the dust versus bombing facilities that intelligence and in some cases reporting says where they could be working on this stuff. Like, what is the strategy with that part of this mission?
I mean, this is a great question. The administration may have a strategy. They have been inconsistent, I would say, in communicating that strategy. I mean, the president, when he announced the ceasefire a few weeks ago, said, hey, maybe Iran should have the right to enrich. Other countries are allowed to enrich, or they have civilian nuclear programs, and so it wouldn't be fair for Iran not to get that. Of course, that goes against sort of his own programming that he'd been saying for years, and that a lot of his advisors had been saying Iran should not have the right to enrich uranium at all. The issue with the JCPOA, I mean, that took years to negotiate, and the Obama administration gave very detailed explanations of what it was seeking to achieve. So allowing Iran to enrich at a low level for a set period of time, and then they would address it again once the terms of the deal ran out. This administration has not given us nearly so detailed a roadmap, but what they do seem to toggle between is an acknowledgement that, listen, we are probably going to have to give them the right to enrich at least at a low level, similar to what the JCPOA did, and then we can figure out the rest later while insisting that they not have a nuclear bomb.
Where's Israel in all of this? Is that also a complicating factor? Sorry. We give you all the easy situations, as you know, to make sense of. We know Benjamin Netanyahu is going to be in town and spending some time with the president. But I'm just curious where they fit into all of this still.
Well, it's a great question because, you're talking about the political centers in the United States and the various factions here and in Iran. And then you have the whole issue of Israel, which with Prime Minister Netanyahu essentially willing to act independently. And in some ways, though he's an ally of the president, acting as a spoiler for the president's plans. So continuing the war in Lebanon and then maintaining its own covert campaign that they have been doing for years to eliminate Iranian nuclear scientists. and essentially conduct their own campaign against Iran. And that has been enormously complicating for President Trump, because we've seen repeatedly that even when the U.S. commits to a ceasefire with Iran, it's not able to stop Israel from attacking Lebanon in particular. But though Iran considers stopping Lebanon, the fighting there to be part of the ceasefire. So it's very complicated and very difficult for the president to control Prime Minister Netanyahu. Netanyahu wants the Iranian regime, essentially, their nuclear program completely eliminated, and is working sometimes at counter purposes to President Trump.
And my apologies. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu actually is not coming to the U.S. next week. He was supposed to. Right. Yeah. But this is as Lindsey Graham's funeral service has been pushed off and postponed a little bit. I don't know. Nick, I am shocked. I think a lot of folks are shocked that here we are still talking about this. I think the assumption was that this would be done early. I think anybody who understood Iran and the Middle East would have said differently when this happened. Where do we go from here? How do you guys, markets sometimes look through it. Markets sometimes don't look through it.
Right.
And so I guess we're just going to have to wait and see. I don't know. Is there a time, some point that you expect the president to talk about it in his speech tonight? We are hearing it's going to be maybe about elections, but I'm just curious.
Right. I think it seems likely that he would address it in some way. But the president really faces a big choice here, because what Iran has shown is that with relatively few resources and despite the intense U.S. bombing campaign, it can really lock up the Strait of Hormuz and keep ships from going through it. So it doesn't need a lot of resources to do that, because it's shippers that are going to make the decision about whether they want to risk that. And right now they're showing they don't want to risk it. That is not something the president has a lot of control over. So in a way, he's really sort of stuck in a bind here. He wants this thing to end, but the only way it seems to get it to end would be to really, in a way, counterintuitively ramp up the military campaign to a degree that he just does not want to do. So it's a real bind. I don't see how this thing ends anytime soon, especially given the complete lack of trust between the two sides. So it feels a little bit like we're going to be in this cycle where the president promises a ceasefire, then maybe we get a ceasefire, then we return to conflict. That's going to happen in many more cycles or repeats of that cycle to come.
Yeah, it absolutely does feel that way.